The grand ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel sparkled with light from towering crystal chandeliers, and hushed murmurs filled the air as New York's elite gathered. But for Julian Carter, this evening was more than just another social event. It was a transaction, the most strategic move of his career. The marriage between him and Clara Delaney wasn't born of love or romance. It was arranged through an agreement between Carter Tech and Delaney Enterprises, two tech giants merging to dominate the global market. For Julian, it was a calculated step, yet something about Clara, her mysterious elegance, made it feel less transactional than he wanted to admit. For Julian, this was the perfect move to solidify his position, not just as a brilliant CEO, but also as the rightful heir to the Carter family empire. And Clara? Julian knew little about her beyond her impressive resume as a literature professor at Columbia. She had agreed to this marriage to save her family's reputation and finances after Delaney Enterprises was marred by scandals caused by her father. Clara was the key to salvaging her family's legacy, and she accepted it as her responsibility. When the massive oak doors at the end of the aisle swung open, Clara entered, her elegance like a living masterpiece. But what left the crowd stunned wasn't just her beauty, it was the intricate black lace mask covering the upper half of her face. Whispers spread like wildfire. Why is she wearing that mask? What is she hiding? Julian wasn't immune to the curiosity. He studied Clara as she approached the altar, an inexplicable mix of intrigue and unease settling in his chest. Her amber eyes, partially hidden behind the lace, met his for a fleeting moment. In that instant, Julian caught a flicker of something unfamiliar. Defiance, perhaps? Or fear? But then it was gone, replaced by a serene composure. As the officiant began to speak, Julian extended his hand toward Clara. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before placing hers in his. Her touch was warm, soft, strikingly human against the cold logic of the arrangement they had signed. And just like that, the deal was sealed. But behind the mask, Clara Delaney kept secrets Julian couldn't yet uncover. Julian Carter wasn't easily distracted, but Clara Delaney had become an exception from the very first day they moved in together. After the wedding, they settled into a luxurious penthouse in the heart of Manhattan. Everything was perfect by Julian's standards. Except for one thing. Clara's mask remained firmly in place. "Aren't you going to take it off?" Julian asked one evening, his tone uncharacteristically soft. He was seated at the work desk in the living room, attempting to focus on Carter Tech documents. Clara stood near the window, the city lights reflecting off her black lace mask. "This mask isn't just to protect me," she replied, her voice calm but sharp. "It's to protect you too." Her answer silenced him. As someone who prided himself on reading people, Julian despised the barrier that Clara's mask represented. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Polished but distant, sharp but guarded. Behind her polite smiles was a wall he couldn't breach. But that didn't mean he didn't want to try. In the days that followed, Julian began to notice how adept Clara was at concealing her emotions. She attended events flawlessly, yet no one truly knew her. When they were alone, she was polite but distant. Whenever he tried to probe about her past, she changed the subject. Everything shifted one evening when Julian overheard Clara on the phone. "I don't want him anywhere near me," she said, her voice tight with anger. "If he keeps pushing, I'll have to do something about it." Julian stepped into the room, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "Who's threatening you?" Clara froze but quickly masked her surprise. "It's nothing, just an old matter." "Old matters don't make you shake like that," he replied, moving closer. "Clara, if we're married, I need to know the truth." She shook her head, the mask trembling slightly. "You wouldn't understand, Julian. Some things are better left buried." Julian stood there, torn between frustration and curiosity. But one thing was clear. Clara Delaney was hiding something much bigger than he had imagined. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with golden lights and the murmur of New York's elite. Julian stood beside Clara, his hand resting lightly on her back, a protective gesture that felt instinctive. As always, Clara wore her black lace mask, maintaining her flawless exterior. Yet Julian could sense the tension in her every breath. "Are you all right?" Julian leaned in to ask softly. "Of course," Clara replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. but her eyes betrayed her unease. And then, as if to explain her nerves, Marcus Reed appeared. His sharp features and smug smile immediately set Julian's teeth on edge. "Clara?" Marcus drawled, stepping closer with a veneer of faux friendliness. "It's been a while. Or should I call you Mrs. Carter now?" Clara froze, her grip tightening on her wine glass to the point where Julian feared she might shatter it. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady but cold. "We need to talk." He glanced at Julian, his gaze dripping with challenge before turning back to Clara. "In private." "There's nothing to talk about," Clara replied, but Marcus stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a predatory glint. "Oh, I think there is. Would you like me to tell your husband the truth, or do you still prefer hiding everything behind that mask?" "That's enough," Julian's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Clara and Marcus. "Who are you? And what gives you the right to speak to her like that?" Marcus shrugged, his smirk unyielding. "Just an old friend who knows a lot about Clara." Clara stepped forward, her trembling hand resting on Julian's arm. "Julian, don't. I'll explain later." But Marcus wasn't done. "Did you know, Julian, Clara used to be my partner, one of the best, until she ruined everything." Julian turned to Clara, his eyes searching for answers. She held his gaze, silently pleading, "I'll tell you everything, but not here." "We're leaving," Julian said, his hand tightening around Clara's waist. But before they could step away, Marcus called out with a venomous grin, "Ask her about Boston. I'm sure you'll find it enlightening." Julian said nothing as they left the gala. His hand remained firm on Clara's waist, his expression cold but resolute. Clara could feel the tension radiating off him, as though he was holding himself back from demanding answers on the spot. They reached the penthouse in silence. The moment the door closed, Julian turned to face Clara, his piercing gaze seeking out the truths she had been hiding. "Boston," he said, his voice low but sharp. "What happened there, Clara?" Clara removed the lace mask and placed it gently on the table, exhaling slowly. She met his gaze, her amber eyes conflicted and afraid. "Marcus Reed was my partner," she began, her voice wavering. Julian crossed his arms, his face unreadable, but she could tell he was listening intently. "He manipulated research data and used my reputation to legitimize his falsified results," Clara continued. "When I discovered it and tried to report him to the ethics board, he turned it all on me." Julian's brow furrowed, his eyes darkening. "And what about Boston? What happened there?" "He called me to a hotel, saying he wanted to apologize and settle things amicably," Clara said, her voice trembling. "But when I got there, he tried to force himself on me. I pushed him away, knocked over a lamp. It caused a scene. Then he took photos to make it look like I was there for other reasons." Julian inhaled deeply, visibly struggling to control the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" Clara lowered her head, her hands clenched tightly. "I was scared. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. And I was afraid that if you knew, you'd see me as a burden instead of a partner." Julian stepped closer, gently lifting her chin so she was forced to look at him. "Clara, what kind of man do you think I am? I don't care what your past looks like. I just want the truth, because it's you." For the first time, Clara felt the walls she had built begin to crumble. "I've been so used to protecting myself, I don't know how to do anything else," she whispered. "Then let me help you," Julian said, his voice softening. "No more masks, no more secrets, just you and me." Clara hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay, but I need you to promise me something, that you won't let Marcus hurt me again." Julian tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes glinting with determination. "I promise." 2 weeks after the confrontation at the gala, Clara stepped into Julian's office with a worried expression. In her hand was an envelope containing the photos Marcus had taken in Boston. Julian had tasked his legal team with investigating Marcus, and today, the final results were in. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Clara asked, her voice filled with hesitation. Julian met her gaze, his eyes resolute. "No more secrets, no more shadows hanging over you." That afternoon, a press conference was held. Julian stood before a wall of cameras and flashing lights, with Clara seated beside him. He began to speak, his voice clear and commanding. We have undeniable evidence of Marcus Reed's long history of misconduct, including data manipulation and intimidation of his colleagues. Clara's story is one of courage. Courage to stand up against injustice, even when it cost her greatly. As Julian finished his statement, Clara looked at him, her heart swelling with both relief and gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt like she had reclaimed her strength. That evening, after the tense press conference, Julian and Clara decided to celebrate at their cozy home in West Village. There were no glittering lights or applause, just the two of them, a bottle of red wine, and the warm quiet of their kitchen. "We've come so far," Clara said, raising her glass. Her eyes were soft, but there was a hint of nervousness lingering. Julian smiled, his gaze fixed entirely on her. "We have, and I think we can finally leave everything behind." They clinked their glasses and took slow sips. Clara set her glass down and stepped closer to Julian. Her hands moved up to her face, fingers brushing the edges of the lace mask she'd worn for so long. "Clara," Julian murmured, his voice low and filled with wonder. "I think," she began, her eyes meeting his, "it's time for nothing to stand between us anymore." Julian studied her, his blue eyes reflecting the flicker of the kitchen light. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "I've never been more sure." As the mask fell away, Julian couldn't look away from her. She was beautiful, not just in appearance, but in the courage and trust she had given him in that moment. For the first time, he felt he was truly seeing her, raw and unguarded. It made his heart ache, not with pity, but with a fierce determination to protect her from everything that had ever hurt her. That night, Clara gave Julian the most precious part of herself, her innocence, something she had kept guarded for so many years. Julian, with tenderness and genuine love, didn't just accept her, but made her feel cherished and deeply loved. Their night together wasn't just about passion, but about breaking every barrier. In Julian's arms, Clara felt like a woman who was fully seen, fully loved, and completely free from her past. 2 months later, on a peaceful morning, Clara walked into the kitchen where Julian was making breakfast. In her hands was a small box with a pregnancy test inside. "Julian," she called softly, her voice a mixture of anticipation and joy. He turned, his piercing blue eyes softening instantly. "What is it?" She handed him the box without a word. When Julian opened it and saw the result, he froze. "Clara, are you saying—" "I'm pregnant," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Julian stepped forward and wrapped her in a tight embrace. "Clara, this means more than you could ever know." His voice broke slightly, something Clara had never heard before. "You've given me everything I didn't know I needed. A family, a home, a future. I can't wait to meet this little one with you." "Then tell me," she whispered, resting her head against his chest. Julian leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "It means we've started a new chapter. No more shadows, no more walls. Just you, me, and our family." 6 months after Marcus Reed's arrest, Clara and Julian had moved out of their penthouse and into a cozier home in West Village. The house symbolized a fresh start for them. A space free of corporate pressures or heavy pasts, filled instead with love and genuine connection. Clara had transformed the ground floor into a literacy center for underprivileged children. She spent hours each day teaching, guiding each child with passion and dedication. Julian, once a CEO who prioritized work above all else, now frequently helped his wife. He smiled as the kids excitedly told him about their favorite books. "Did you ever imagine yourself doing this?" Clara asked one morning as they prepared reading tables for the kids. Julian raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Never? But now I can't imagine life any other way." Their life wasn't just about changing routines. Clara and Julian had learned to fully open up to one another. Quiet evenings by the fireplace, endless conversations about their dreams for the future, and moments of shared silence. All of it became an inseparable part of their lives. When their baby arrived in the spring, Julien cried. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to fully feel. The baby girl, with amber eyes just like her mother's, was named Evelyn. "This little one will be the reason we keep pushing forward every day," Julien said, cradling his daughter in his arms. Clara smiled, leaning into him. "We've come so far, Julien. I didn't think this was possible when we started." "But it happened," Julien whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Because we chose each other, Clara. And you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." They didn't just build a family, they created a community from their love. The children at the literacy center, the new neighbors, even old colleagues who sought them out to learn how to move past their own struggles. Clara and Julien's life wasn't perfect. They still faced challenges, but now they faced them together. And for both of them, that was what mattered most. 1 year after Evelyn was born, Julien and Clara's life seemed to have settled into a peaceful rhythm. But challenges never truly disappeared when you lived in the public eye. One crisp autumn afternoon, Julien arrived home earlier than usual. He walked into the living room to find Clara sitting by the fireplace, an open envelope on the table, and a worried expression on her face. "What's wrong?" Julien asked, setting his briefcase down and moving closer to her. Clara handed him the envelope. Inside was a letter from a prominent journalist investigating her past with Marcus Reed. Despite Marcus being arrested and his crimes exposed, some people remained curious about what had happened between them. "They want an interview," Clara said softly, her voice tinged with anxiety. "They want me to tell my side of the story. But doing that will open everything. All the pain, the scrutiny. It won't just affect me. It'll affect you, Evelyn, and the literacy center." Julien sat beside her, his jaw tightening. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. "If they want to dig into the past, we'll show them the truth. Not just what happened, but how you rose above it." Julien sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "We've faced worse, Clara. You don't have to deal with this alone." "I just don't want Evelyn growing up in the shadow of all this," Clara sighed, her eyes reflecting exhaustion. "You're an incredible mother. And Evelyn will know you're brave, not because of what happened in the past, but because of how you overcame it," Julien said, his voice gentle but firm. The next day, they decided to face the situation together. Clara agreed to do the interview, but this time Julien would sit beside her, holding her hand through it all. During the interview, Clara recounted her story, from the trauma Marcus caused to how Julien became her unwavering support. Julien, with pride in his voice, added affirmations about her strength and courage. When the interview aired, the public's support for Clara and Julien grew stronger than ever. Clara's literacy center received an outpouring of donations, and their story became an inspiration for others navigating life's struggles. "We did it," Julien said one quiet evening, as they played with Evelyn in their small garden. "No, we'll do so much more," Clara replied, her confident smile lighting up her face. "Because we're a family,